I would like to start with an object lesson about how many people who are good sight readers it takes for the whole section to sound like it's sight reading well. So would you please open your sight reading books? Open your sight reading books. And turn to page 4. We're going to do pattern number 16 on page 4. All right? And you don't need dough, you'll just, you guys all have perfect pitch, so this will be easy. Ready? All right, we're doing pattern number 16 on page 4. Ready? Here we go. Everybody sing along. Ready? Do, mi, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re. Sol, la, sol, mi, re, sol, sol. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, do, fa. Mi, re, do, re, sol, do.
That's one.
Right, exactly. It only takes one in a section for the section to sound like it's sight reading. All right, now we're going to do sight reading with text. If you could turn to the back of the book, we're on page 39 now. And we're going to do pattern number 417 on page 39. This one is with text. Ready? Here we go. I pray you, if you love me, bear my joy a little while, or else I may bear your tears. Anybody know who the poet was? In the St. Vincent Millay. So the reason I do that is because it's actually not the easiest place to practice sight singing when you're in a group, because it's too easy to lean. And you can feel like you're doing great until there's nobody to lean upon, and then all of a sudden you're like, So a lot of tonight is actually going to be kind of like a TED Talk. So I'm gonna be sort of spouting a lot of information and giving you a lot of ideas, and I'm actually kind of deliberately not making it terribly participatory, precisely for that reason, because this is stuff that you need to do on your own, by yourself, and if we do it all together, you're going to feel great, but you won't have the experience of what it's like to do it on your own. So I'm going to be telling you a lot of stuff that you can try on your own to bring this stuff together. And I will simply make this comment at the outset. There is no right or wrong or one best way to do this stuff. Everybody learns differently, and ultimately what is best for you is what actually works and what feels like it's paying off when you go to a rehearsal and you feel like you are leaning less. And you'll know, right? So I want to start off by talking a little bit about music as language, and I'm going to ask you to reflect upon your experiences observing a small child learn language, and I'm going to ask you to reflect upon your experiences of yourself. Most of us don't remember when we learned our first language, but whenever it was in your life that you attempted to tackle a second language. And just think about those things for a minute. When a small child is learning language, the first thing they do is imitate sound. And they're just imitating sound that they hear. And they watch an adult's mouth move or another human's mouth move, and they make their mouth move, and they soon learn, completely not consciously, that they can vary their jaw position and their tongue position and their lip position and make their tongue contact the roof of their mouth in various ways that will make the same sounds that they heard the older human make. And they're not aware, they don't have this thought, like, your 1.5-year-old toddler is not thinking, oh, if I make my tip of my tongue contact the roof of my mouth right behind my upper front teeth, I can get a T sound. Like, they don't think that, right? They just, they hear t, and they go t, and somehow they figure it out. So they're stringing sounds together, And eventually, they notice that those sounds organize themselves into patterns, and if they make their own sounds organize themselves into patterns, they can sometimes get what they want, right? Whether that be food, or milk, or a cuddle, or a diaper change, or whatever, they learn that different sounds get them different things, and of course, the getting of the thing reinforces that that was in fact the right sound to make for that thing, and all of a sudden we've got words, right? And then as a child goes forward, they develop a vocabulary of words, and they realize that words can be strung together in an order, and there's usually the subject of the sentence and then the verb or the predicate or something like that. So, me hungry, me want macaroni and cheese, etc. And usually it's little two-word or three-word or three-element syntactical strings that consist of subject, verb, and object, or subject and predicate. But from the get-go, it's not macaroni and cheese want me. It's me want macaroni and cheese. And so there's an understanding of SVO word order from the very earliest stages, shortly after vocabulary acquisition. And then, so basically you have the beginnings of syntax when you string words together. And then the vocabulary gets bigger and bigger, the syntactical strings get bigger and bigger, and at some point around age 3 or 4, there's usually the beginnings of attempts to teach the alphabet, which means teaching that there are symbols that represent discrete sounds, and because English is a phonetic mess, that's a challenge, but somehow it happens, and then much later than all of that, the kid begins to learn that there are rules. And it's not me want macaroni and cheese, it's I want macaroni and cheese. And it's not I taked the cat out, it's I took the cat out. And things like that. And interestingly, there is usually a period in early childhood where the child will go from speaking normal standard English to hyper-correcting as they begin to learn those rules. And so you get taked after you've already mastered took or taken, and then it reverts back once the kid realizes that there are irregularities and exceptions. So all of this stuff happens before the child really learns how to read on their own. So there's a sizable command of language before the skill of reading is implemented. And the same thing happens with music. We are surrounded by music, we learn how to imitate sound, we learn that sounds have patterns, and we learn to make those patterns and to understand their intuitive syntax long before we learn notation or things like scales and stuff like that. And so that's the first part of the handout. The sequence that you see there is the standard Kodai pitch sequence that is based primarily on North American and European folk music corpus. The idea that most kids start out learning so me, which is the sing-songy thing that just about all parents in Western culture will map words onto when they want to make them sing-songy. And when we think of the word sing-songy, we immediately think minor third, descending minor third. So mi la is usually the one that gets added next. So mi do as a cadential phrase is the one that they figure out that, and then after they figure out that there's a do at the end, it's mi re do. It's all you've got a pentatonic scale. This is the sort of sequence in which Kodai proposed that kids acquire pitches, so it's not necessarily do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do in order, but it's rather these things that go from the most basic to slightly more and more sophisticated. An interesting aside is that we're starting to learn through ethnomusicological endeavor that the universal interval, if there is one, is probably not a minor third, but a neutral third, which doesn't exist in Western music. But if you listen to recordings of parents and kids from all over. The third is a little bit wider than a minor third, but it's not quite a major third. And that neutral third exists as an official step of the scale in many other cultures, but not the Western scale. And among the cultures in which it exists are various cultures throughout the entire continent of Africa. And another hypothesis that's beginning to emerge is that that neutral third is the origin of the blues third. Because if you think about a blues scale that goes that is a little bit sharper than a minor third, but it's not quite a major third. And there's usually a little bit of a slide that goes along. And the idea is that that neutral third might have been part of the origin of that. Anyway, the other thing that a kid learns is that there's the rhythm of words, and then there's the thing that they experience as a beat. So if they're keeping the beat, and they sing da 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 da, they can easily figure out that there are some beats which have two vocal sounds on them, and a lot of beats have one vocal sound. And eventually they learn that beats are grouped into meter, so and so on and so forth. And so you immediately get this sense of these little patterns that occur in lots of different songs, and those become elements of vocabulary. And then the fact that usually there's a da 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 followed by a da 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 or da da dum or whatever, such that there's a unit that doesn't end on do, and a second unit that ends on do, and a third unit that doesn't end on do, and a fourth unit that does end on do. And that's the beginning of phrase structure and syntax. Just like me want macaroni and cheese and not macaroni and cheese want me. For example, if I sing da 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 dum bum da 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 dum ba da 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 dum, right? You're like, where's the next phrase? And that's way before a kid has a sense of da 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 dum being incomplete, right? I mean, you all heard the high do right there, but a kid will learn that there are these phrase patterns, and that do is something that happens every so often, but not all the time, and it usually happens at the ends of things. And just as is the case with language, it's much, much later that a kid's ear begins to hear harmonic implication. And harmonic implication has to be conditioned by exposure to harmonized sound. So all of those prefab recordings that contain nursery rhymes and things like that, and all of those, and then of course pop music. Those are the beginnings of the understanding of harmonic implication, which forms the grammar according to which those melodies are understood. And that's the point at which the understanding rarely, for the vast majority of society, rarely progresses beyond the intuitive. But the intuitive understanding of that harmonic implication and that sort of musical grammar that lies underneath melody is nevertheless very highly developed. It's just not consciously expressible. And the way that manifests is a person can tell you whether a chord sounds right or not, even if they don't know that it's a 5-chord or a 1-chord or a 4-chord. So, for example, if I play this for a 3-year-old, they're going to know that they're like, no, that's not the way it goes. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to be able to tell me why, but they're going to know it doesn't go like that. Oh, okay, well, does it go like this? They'll be like, well, it's closer, but you did something weird at the end. Why did you do that? Why are you ruining the song? You know, so. All of this is to say that a lot of times when we're trying to become better at sight reading, we don't layer those understandings in thoroughly enough before we try to move straight to sight reading Bach. And it's those little patterns that need to be structured in the brain more solidly so that they're recognizable as patterns in order for us to be able to sight read stuff that consists of lots of patterns strung together that go by very rapidly, which is what sight reading Bach consists of. So, for example, a lot of times if you excuse me, if you take our capacity for sight reading Bach as being measured by, if you put an unfamiliar Bach score in front of them and give them a starting pitch, can they sight read it off essentially error-free? That's a pretty highly developed set of sight singing skills, and there are relatively few people in the choral world, even among experienced choral singers, who can do that. However, if you put Shakespeare in front of somebody, they're going to be able to get through it pretty well. They're not going to need a starting pitch. And they'll be able to read it off with maybe a stumble here or there, but they're going to be able to get through it. So the task that we set ourselves, and I'm going to be like super Western canon for a second here, but if we compare Shakespeare and Bach, it's like we're trying to produce a complete performance of a Shakespeare play, having to be taught every soliloquy and every dialogue essentially by ear with with this sheet of paper that has stuff that helps us trigger what we are essentially still mostly memorizing. So the idea is, can we get ourselves more to the place where we're relying less on the repetition aspect of it and more on actually being able to read off? So just to illustrate that for a second, turn over to the second sheet of the handout and look for a moment at number 3, compound meter. You probably already finished reading the whole paragraph right now, right? All right, read it out loud and pay attention to where your eyes are as you read it out loud. Ready? Go. Compound meter, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and or 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly. Subdivision of E is often not really possible. How many of you had already seen the word beneficial? See, right? So your eyes are tracking ahead of where your mouth is, which is exactly what we need to do when we're sight reading music, but we often don't. Our eyes are often exactly upon the note that we're singing. And so what's happening is that your brain is speaking, subdivision of beat is often, but there's also a portion of your brain that has already heard the sounds of the word beneficial and is basically like getting them in the hopper, ready to be spoken. Some of you might have even gotten all the way to like can be handled by inserting or something like that. And so easily, if you look at Roman numeral 5, just silently hear those words at whatever your normal reading pace is. I would wager that you probably, before I started talking again, got it all the way through practice the following Paltrowitz, and you were wondering how to pronounce Paltrowitz, right? So the other thing is that we audiate at a faster speed than we produce when we're dealing with written language. And that is also possible with music. So I think I can probably do this. Can y'all see that okay? Okay? Now, I'm just going to draw a thing up here that you're going to immediately hear in your head. And if y'all need to stand up, please feel free. All right? Ready? Here I go. Did you immediately hear that to the notes of a major scale? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, probably every one of you started on a different tonic in your head. And I would also wager that probably none of you heard those notes to the first 5 notes of a minor scale. Did anybody do that? I'm about to be really impressed if you did. So this kind of thing is really, really easy to audiate. In other words, you can hear it in your head because that's a pattern that you know as a pattern. You don't have to figure out each interval relative to the preceding one. You know it all together. And if I did this, then you could immediately hear the first 5 notes of a minor scale. And probably as soon as I drew the flat sign, your brain went from bum 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 to bum 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 bum. And then if I started adding other flats, or if I added a sharp, then it would, all hell would break loose. And you would your ability to hear all 5 things as a pattern would probably start to disintegrate a little bit if I started getting wacky with the scales, right? So, the task then is to increase by exponential proportions the quantity of patterns that you can recognize as patterns instead of simply going note by note by note by note by note. And that's, so how many of you are familiar with the debate that got started, I guess, back in the late 70s, early 80s about phonics versus whole language? Yeah, okay, so yeah, I mean, there's this theory that you taught a child how to read by teaching them the letters and teaching them what sounds each letter made and then teaching them the exceptions. And the exceptions mounted and mounted and mounted and mounted, and then we figured out, when kids are read bedtime stories, they're actually learning to recognize whole words and even whole phrases as a single group without knowing what the letters necessarily sound like. I mean, for example, the word group already breaks all kinds of rules, but if you get read the bedtime story over and over again enough, you're going to recognize that as the word group, and you're not going to wonder why OU means ooh here, and it means ow there, and it means there, right? So in order to build that scaffolding, the research that's out there about folks who sight read best, over and over again, comes up with the fact that they also have keyboard skills. And that the keyboard skills are what help the brain pattern pitches such that they can be reproduced in the inner ear and then produced by the voice. So the first practical thing that I have to say to you is, if you don't have a keyboard at home, order one of those $30 or $40 little miniature keyboards and go to the Guitar Center or any music store or go on Amazon and get an adult self-teaching beginner piano course and begin working through that. If you do that, you will become a better sight singer faster than if you spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours with a pitch pipe and a hymnal. So that's thing number 1. Become better at the keyboard. And that actually applies to whatever level you're at. So if you're already playing Chopin, then start working a list. But it's the act of exposing the brain to a kinesthetic analog of our entire pitch system on a regular basis that makes those pitches accessible to the ear, which then makes them reproducible by the voice. So that's practical thing number 1. Assuming that you're going to do that for 10 or 15 minutes every day, the next thing that you want to do is transfer those pitch patterns to what you do with your voice. And so here's where I'm going to start to get into the nitty-gritty. There are lots and lots of different systems by which you can deal with pitch. So let me just give myself a C major here. Right. Sing after me. Do, re, mi, fa, sol.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
C, D, E, F, G.
C, D, E, F, G.
Now, it doesn't matter which system you use as long as you pick a system and stick with it. So pick whichever one already makes a little bit more sense than the others to you, and just continue to develop that. And if you feel like you're really, really good at one of them and you want more exercise, then move to one that you're less familiar with. So if you, for example, spend a lot of time in Europe, using fixed do might be very, very natural to you, and you might think C, D, E, you might think do, re, mi, fa, sol, and then if you play D major, you might think re, mi, fa, sol, la, and if you play E major, you might think mi, fa, sol, la, si, and it's C and not T in fixed do, etc. Fa, sol, la, si, do. If that works for you, fine, go for it. If you are, if do makes sense as the root of any scale no matter what, then you're going to want to do do, re, mi, fa, sol, and do do-based minor, if that makes sense for your brain. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do. However, if you aren't comfortable altering those chromatic tones, you might want to start with la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. And it doesn't matter which one you pick, but pick one, and then use the easiest, simplest stuff that you're using in your piano book, and sing it on solfege, or numbers, or whatever system you choose. So there's information there about how solfege is structured, and going into the detail of how to practice with solfege is beyond the scope of what I can accomplish in an hour. But if there is interest, I could put together a here's how to do solfege intensive kind of thing for a future workshop. So when we ask for feedback and suggestions and stuff about this one, if there's interest in that, let us know, and I'll put together a solfege boot camp kind of thing. So scale degree numbers are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have found, actually, that often in a choral rehearsal with mostly adult singers who don't have a lot of prior solfege background, that numbers is a quicker clarifying tool than solfege. Solfege works with my college students because most of them came from high school programs where they were doing a whole bunch of solfege. And so my students at Binghamton will ask me, can you just give us the solfege for that? Or what's the solfege for this interval when they're struggling with something? And that makes it click. But with adults who don't have a uniformly consistent solfege background, numbers often is quicker. And so that might be something that you want to take into consideration for starting off your own practice if you don't have a system that you already are in love with. Then the last thing is count singing, and I wish that there were a stack of stack of hymnals. Is there a place that we can get hymnals?
Not so many hymnals, but I've got Oxford books.
Oh yeah,
English madrigals, that kind of thing.
English madrigals probably beyond the scope of what we can do right now. Let me.
I don't think there's enough hymnals.
There's the Carol's book.
There's the carols. You mean the one right over there on the shelf, or is it a bigger
It's
shelf
like that.
somewhere?
I'll
Oh,
talk
yeah.
more about
Talk amongst yourselves for 3 minutes.
So I never heard of solfege until right now. I can't do it, but I know that it I had.
Melissa, did you grow up with solfege?
Well, I taught Yamaha school,
Oh, there you go.
and we taught fixed do. So
Oh, wow.
I use fixed do solfege. But we didn't use like do, re, mi, because we'd say to the kids, we're in F major, because they squeeze it, and you know that T is a T flat. So for singing, we sing a T, but they would sing a T flat, so we just mouth, so they didn't. But we weren't singing, you know. We might get to pretty flat.
You know, it's funny, until tonight I never really connected piano with sight singing. But that's why I don't like solfege, because I started on piano early enough that C, D, E, F, G makes sense to me. And I actually see it on the piano with the black and the white.
When I was in elementary school, this old music teacher, he would point and sing solfege, and I'm left-handed. He made me use my right hand. So my brain said, this is
So take one for each. This has got the super familiar ones in it, so this will be great.
Two people share.
And while they're going around,
Okay. One for two people?
One for two. There's also some hard ones in here.
Yeah. One for two people?
Here's some more. Here's some more.
Okay. Do we have them relatively well distributed?
None of the above?
We actually have more coming around, so it might not even have to be one every two.
Levine, would you like a nice big one?
We were the old guys.
Go ahead and open to page 2, away in a major. We're going to start super simple. I just want to illustrate these techniques here.
What page is that?
Page 2.
Thank you.
Page 2. This is the... We're going to do all of them. Alright, so we're going to do fixed do first. Alright? So that means do, fa, fa, right? Okay, here we go. Ready? 1 and 2. Do, fa, fa, sol, la, fa, fa, la, si, do, re, si, sol, la, si, do, la, fa, sol, re, fa, mi, do, fa, sol, la, si, do, re, si, sol, la, si, do, la, fa, sol, re, mi, fa. Now, how many of you did that completely warp your brain? No? All right, now we're going to do Moveable Dough, which is so, do, do, because we're in F major, and so F is do. That means C is so, and we'll go on from there, all right? We'll see how this feels. Ready, and go. So, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, re, mi, fa, sol, mi, do, mi, re, la, do, ti. So, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, re, mi, fa, sol, mi, do, mi, re, la, ti, do. For how many of you was that easier? Okay. All right, numbers. 5, 1, ready, and go. 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 4, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, 6, 1, 7, 5, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 4, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2, 6, 7, 1. For how many of you was that the easiest yet? Okay. All right. Now, letters. C, F. And you have to sing B flat every time it's a B flat. Ready? And go. C, F, F, G, A, F, F, A, B flat, C, C, D, B flat, G, A, B flat, C, A, F, A, G, D, F, E, C, F, F, G, A, F, F, A, B flat, C, C, D, B flat, G, A, B flat, C, A, F, A, G, D, E, F. For how many of you was that the easiest one yet? Interesting. Yeah. The reason I advocate actually doing the flats and sharps for every time is that when you're using letters, you're putting those pitches in an absolute sense in muscle memory. And so you don't want to sing B if it's B flat because you're confusing your association between the muscular configuration necessary to produce B natural and the muscular configuration necessary to produce B flat. Now, if you're using fixed dough, it's a different thing because fixed dough operates such that dough is either C sharp or C natural, re is either D flat or D sharp. And for whatever reason, and I don't know that there's been a lot of research into this, but for whatever reason, fixed dough is less problematic in terms of throwing absolute pitch to muscle memory associations off. But if you are singing F, if you're singing F when you're actually singing, if you're saying F when you're singing F sharp, then you're confusing what your sense of F is and what your sense of F sharp is. With numbers, some people prefer simply to use the single syllable sev instead of seven. I actually have my kids sing seven because it just makes me laugh. Same thing with B flat. I mean, whenever we do letters in sight singing at Binghamton, I always make them put the flats and sharps in, and they just start giggling. And then sight singing all of a sudden becomes slightly less torturous because they're laughing at it. So, all right, last thing is count singing. Now, count singing is not necessarily going to solidify your sense of interval relationships if they are not yet strong. However, once your sense of pitch reading is at a comfortably progressing pace, and this is one of the big sort of mysterious truths of sight singing that people never believe until they have enough experiences of the fact that it is actually true, and then they start to believe it. Once your sense of pitch is comfortably progressing along, you have to shift from prioritizing pitch to prioritizing rhythm. And the reason for that is that as your pitch sense becomes more intuitively accurate, solfege, or any pitch system, will start to get in the way. Solfege, or any other pitch system, is training wheels. Everybody, when they're learning to ride a bike, reaches a point where they don't need the training wheels anymore, and actually training wheels make it difficult to do the tight turns and things like that. And so I will have students who come in to audition at Binghamton, and I'll give them, if they're sight reading really, really well, and they're like plowing through my sort of graded exercises that I do to establish what level they're at, I'll ask them to sight read the hardest one. They'll invariably try to do it with solfege, but they'll do it at the speed that their brain can hear it, which is faster than they can produce the solfege, and the solfege trips them up. And I say, you can do it without solfege. And they'll be like, really? And I'll be like, yes. And then they do it through and it's perfect. Because they're reading at the pace that that their brain is hearing it, and they're not worrying about the solfege. Because they're already reading, essentially, the musical equivalent of words and phrases and not letters. It's whole language, not phonics. So, that's why count singing is ultimately the goal of all reading systems, because count singing is what will allow you to do the pitches intuitively, and then the more you do it, the correct pitches will simply reinforce themselves, but the count singing is what establishes the structure by which you can read harder and harder stuff. So, we're going to count sing this, but we're going to really fast. T1, T1, 2, Tn1, 2. Ready? And T1, 2, Tn1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2, T1, 2, Tn1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2, Tn1, 2, T1, 2. And one of the things about count singing is that you always sing every counted beat. So if it's a half note, it needs 2 numbers in it. If it's a whole note, it needs 4 numbers in it. Always, always, always. You can put the ands in, Tn1 and 2 and Tn1 and 2 and Tn1 and 2, which is a very Robert Shaw thing to put the subdivisions in. But you have to put all the counted beats in no matter what. All right, so just as a practice thing, look at the bass line. No slower. Tn1, 2, Ready? 2, T, 1.
T and 1, 2, T, 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 1, 2, T and 1 and 2 and 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 T 1 and 2 T and 1, 2, T, 1, 2.
And you will notice that you might have glurfed a few of the pitches here or there, but you were able to continue all the way through and you were able to get the contour, and you got most of the pitches right. And I mean, not even my brain can solfege those syllables that fast, and I'm a pretty darn good solfeger. So that's how count singing works. And count singing starts to break down when you're doing extended count singing in half note beat or eighth note beat. Count singing also starts to break down when you're doing compound meter and you need subdivisions of the subdivisions. When you're doing, I wonder if there's any of like super familiar carols that are notated in compound meter. I'll race you. Who can find one? Is Silent Night notated in compound meter, or is it in 3/4 in here?
6/8.
Is it 6/8?
6/8.
All right, what page?
I saw 3 ships at 6/8.
Give me a page.
Carol is in 6/8.
Page number?
6/8, I saw 3 ships.
56. 56 is I Saw 3 Ships.
Yes.
Oh, that's the tune that all right, 54 is the tune that most people know. But it's in a kind of a high key. Where was Silent Night?
Oh, I don't think it's.
Oh, it's not in here.
I'm just saying, silent.
Right. Right.
Oh, actually, 54 is the common tune.
Okay, do this in whatever octave is comfortable. Now, I would wager that if you're going to count sing this, those of you who have count sung in compound meter before, I mean, obviously you can do it 6, 6, 1, 2, T, 1, 2, T, 1, 2, 1, 2, T, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, T, 4, 5, 6, which is super slow and gets really, really cumbersome because it doesn't feel like the way the tune actually goes. And 1, a 2, and 1, and 2, and 1, and 2, or a 1, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 1, a 2. Eastman advocates Li 1, Li 2, Li 1, Li 2, Li 1, Li 2, Li 1, Li 2, because it's 1 La Li, 1 La Li, 1 La Li, 1 La Li, which would make the ending Li 1, Li 2, La Li, 1, 2. The advantage of the 1 La Li, 2 La Li thing is that you can put a ta in between all the syllables, wanda, lada, lida, and you can get 16th notes in a way that doesn't completely kerfuffle you. I have found that count singing is still of only limited utility in compound meter, even with a group that's really familiar with 1 La Li, 2 La Li, and can do 1 da la da lida, 2 da la da lida without stumbling all over themselves. But count singing is good for things that are in duple meter, in just about any level of beat, half note beat, quarter note beat, eighth note beat, whatever you please. So I went into the general count singing rules there, which is basically kind of what I just went through. That's at the second half, or the first half of the second page. Now, I'm going to say 2 more things about Christmas carols in general before we leave this and go on and do some other stuff. First thing is that making yourself, and this thing that I'm about to suggest does not work in fixed do or letters. It only works for numbers or movable do solfege. But if you want to teach yourself intervals and scale degrees so that you can read them quickly and so that you can hear them, the best way to do it is to make yourself solfege or number Christmas carols in your head while you're like vacuuming or washing dishes. So just as an exercise, let's take O Come All Ye Faithful, and don't open the book. And by ear, okay, starts on do. Do, do. Ready? And.
Do, do, sol, do, re, sol, mi, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, do, ti, la, ti, do, re, mi, do,
Ti, la,
fa, mi, re, mi, do, re, ti, la, sol, do, ti, do, re, so, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do, fa, mi, re, do.
There you go. All right. Let me think. Angels we have heard on high. Numbers starts on 3. Ready? We'll go slow. 3, 3, 3, and ready and go.
3, 3, 3, 5, 5, 4, 3, 3, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1. 3, 3, 3, 5, 5, 4, 3, 3, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1. 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 5, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 5, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So doing that kind of thing is, it can be anything. It can be folk songs, it can be The Water is Wide, it can be I'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, or it'll be, pop songs too, although pop songs get weird. But making yourself do the intervals out for familiar stuff will layer in those intervals more securely, because you're not doing two processes at the same time. You're not trying to decode an unfamiliar melody and assign solfege to what you're simultaneously trying to decode. You already have the melody familiar, so you know what the tune is. All you're trying to do is figure out what the solfege is, but you know the pitches. So what you're doing is basically learning to read from a text that you already know by heart. So, as many kids with their bedtime stories can repeat the bedtime story word for word for word, long before they start paying attention to the words on the page. They have it memorized by ear, and then as the adult starts to draw their finger along, the child is learning to associate these weird squiggles with words that they already know by ear. And that's kind of one of the foundational principles of whole language teaching, is that you actually learn the words, and then you are learning what they look like, already knowing how they have been strung together. So the other thing about Christmas carols is that, or anything out of a hymnal, or anything that's out of a folk tune compendium where the folk songs are relatively simple, is that it's a really easy thing to pick things that look simple but are unfamiliar. Like, for example, if A Great and Mighty Wonder is, on the very first page, is not familiar to you, if you don't know that tune, then with your newly burgeoning piano skills, you can give yourself the first pitch, and then you can do a number of different things when you're sitting at the piano. And this is another practical thing that you can do little by little to improve your ability to track. You can do A great and mighty wonder. And so what I did was I took a guess at that descending interval, and then I corrected myself from the keyboard, and then I was wrong. So it goes wonder, and then I go back to the beginning. A great and mighty wonder of full and this is really weird prosody, so I'm just going to take a guess when I'm sitting at home with my keyboard. Full and holy cure. And I check the ending pitch to see if I was right. And if I wasn't right, then I back up and I do smaller and smaller groupings and check myself at the piano until I can do an entire grouping correctly. And you can do that with simple stuff, and then as your piano skills get better, so too will your rhythmic reading and your interval reading, such that you can then give yourself a starting pitch for, say, you know the stuff on page 2, but you don't know the tune on page 3. Now, just for kicks, how many of you do know this tune? A small handful. Okay, let's just sight read it with text. 1 and 2. Ah, there's a mistake number 1. So, yep, all of us are used to, which is in a nice sunny F major, and so we all made the assumption that whatever this was, it was going to be in a major key, and we all sang a C sharp instead of a C natural. All right, now without giving it to you, see if you can make yourself sing a C natural. Those are the first 2 notes. Ready, and go.
Away in a manger, crib for a bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. The stars in the bright sky looked down where he lay. The little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay.
And again, we mapped an assumption about the syllable for sleep, that it was going to go down to the E natural that we had encountered before. And so if we were checking ourselves at the piano, we would probably find out that we had gotten off by 1 step by the end of that phrase. So, little Lord Jesus. And here's what I'm going to warn you against. Don't just sing while you play. If you sing while you play, you are doing nothing other than what we did at the very beginning of this hour.
You're following the
Except that your finger is Bill doing sight reading pattern number 14 on page 3. Right? So give yourself only what you need. So, little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay. It's a beautiful melody. You know, and it ends on that sort of... And it's got that beautiful modal kind of dark, which changes the feeling of the text, obviously, considerably, right? But yeah, so make yourself do it as independently as possible, and then use the piano to check. And that, if you do a little bit of that kind of activity, and again, this is the gospel of do it in small bursts, but you have to do it pretty much every day. Because if you do it once a week, you will never get any better than you were the previous week. You've got to do it in little teeny bursts, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, spend 10 or 15 minutes practicing your piano and another 10 or 15 minutes practicing your sight singing. And do it as often as you possibly can. I'm going to go through these next things just quickly enough so that you can kind of get a sense of where to go next. And then we'll take some questions and things. So these grids that you see are designed to get you away from having to fill in intervals by step. So for example, if you see the E up to the A of the first interval of the second tune of Away in a Manger, you might start out needing the scaffolding of da 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 dum bum bum. And that's totally fine for the beginning. But obviously, you're not going to have time when you're sight reading at speed to be able to fill in intervals with the scale steps. And so this next thing is designed to get you thinking intervals really, really brutally fast. You can do any solfege syllable in any octave you want. So let's just go ahead and do C major. Here's C major. So this is Roman numeral 5, letter B, pattern number 1. You can sing it in any octave. We'll go about this speed. Ready, and go.
Do, mi, sol, mi, la, ti, re, sol, fa, do, re, sol, do.
Do it again and try to pick different octaves. Ready? And go.
Do, mi, sol, mi, la, ti, re, sol, fa, do, re, sol, do.
Right? Right? Now, flip to the next page. You can do them with scale degree numbers if that's better for you. Do number 2. Still in C major. Numbers. Ready? And go.
1, 6, 5, 2, 7, 2, 5, 3, 2, 1, 3, 6, 1.
The advantage of the numbers is that you can do it with natural minor too if you want to challenge yourself. You could do it with harmonic minor if you want to challenge yourself. You probably can't do it with melodic minor because you'd have to decide ahead of time which octave you're going to use and then figure out the direction. But it works with natural or harmonic minor too. Let's do it with harmonic minor just for kicks. So listen. Okay, pattern number 2 or pattern number 3. Yeah, 3. Ready?
1, 2, 5, 4, 7, 2, 5, 7, 3, 2, 3, 7, 1.
Yep, see? So it's fun to kind of mess around with. You could do 1, 3, 5, 3, 6, 7, 2, 5, 4, 1, 2, 5, 1. Or 1, 3, 5, 3, 6, 7, 2, 5, 4, 1, 2, 5, 1. Or any, like, make up a rhythm pattern and just repeat it. And that makes your brain think faster, but it also gives your brain little rest points because not all the notes are the same length. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of links under letter E for materials that you can use for sight singing practice. This is all stuff like the archive.org things are sight singing methods that are in public domain now, and it's like pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of sight singing exercises. There's also that YouTube thing, which is a wonderful set of videos on practicing sight singing. And then there's links there for Bach chorales. So once you feel like you're ready to do Bach chorales, you can have every single one of them is available for free on the internet. And the last thing that I will say, and this is where the kind of, the proof is in the pudding, is get sheet music, either online or from your church library or from your community chorus library or whatever, get sheet music, and then find YouTube recordings or recordings of your own off of iTunes or whatever, and sing along with pieces whose style you are familiar with, but the actual piece you don't know. So, for example, if you've sung Handel's Messiah, then find a YouTube recording of Israel in Egypt or Judas Maccabeus. You're familiar with Handel's style from Handel's Messiah. Make yourself sight read Handel that you don't know. Handel wrote gobs and gobs and gobs of oratorios. Every single one of them is on YouTube in multiple performances, and you can find the vocal scores for all of them online at either CPDL or IMSLP, and I'll put those, I can put those on here. I will put those in the email thing that we're going to try to get in touch with you, but I'm going to write them up here also. It's cpdl.org and imslp.org. CPDL is Choral Public Domain Library. IMSLP, I always forget what the acronym is. It's International Music Score something. Yeah. But IMSLP is a lot of older printed editions of major Western composers' stuff that is now in public domain. And so you can get gobs and gobs of choral music on both of these sites for free. You can print them out if you want, or you can just load them as PDFs into your tablet and swipe through the pages as you blast the music on your stereo or in your headphones. And the thing about sight reading with recordings that you don't know the piece is that the recording doesn't stop. And so all of this stuff comes together and this is the last thing that I will say. When you're sight reading in a group of humans, sight read as if everybody else in your section is leaning on you. As if, and just put yourself in the frame of mind that you are the strongest, most experienced singer there, and everyone is depending upon you. And if you make a couple of mistakes, no one will die. But if you are mousy and underconfident, no one will learn. So sight read as if they are all depending upon you. Sight reading at the end of the day is 90% bluffing. And it's learning how to bluff more and more accurately. But it's very much a fake it till you make it kind of skill. You have to start out doing things harder than you think you can, and then all of a sudden it gets easier. You have to step out of the boat before you realize that you can walk on water.
So be vulnerable.
So what's that?
Let yourself be vulnerable.
Let yourself be vulnerable, absolutely. As I say all the time, and as Martin wrote such a beautiful poem about, peccate audaciter, sin boldly. Make loud mistakes when you are sight reading. Take risks and don't be afraid. Don't go for perfection, go for continuity. And the more you do that, the faster the skill will develop. So, there you go. Thank you for coming.